All right, back to class. I'm really going to concentrate on the houses, but I'm going to give you a key understanding which will apply in all the charts we look at. When you're looking at a vocation, you need to find an outlet for your temperament and personality. Your dominant planet is the key to that. If it's Jupiter, you need to be working in sales or philanthropy or in conditions where you make people feel good and make them feel like they're getting more than their money's worth.
I might be able to help, but you was asked to repeat questions that come in from here because I just heard you.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. And we're going to try and hold the questions to the end of class, if possible. That way we can answer them all at once, and I'll remember to repeat. So basically, your dominant planet, let's say it's Saturn, then you might work in the wholesale market somewhere where you're buying things at a bargain or working with accountancy, where you're working in safety or protection of some kind. If it's the moon, you're going to be a nurturer or a caretaker, regardless of what you do. But regardless of whether the dominant planet is harmonious or discordant, your need is to express those urges. But we try to find an arena or an avenue to go down career-wise, which is harmonious. That means it's an environment that when we're in it, we're feeling pleasurable. We want to associate happy with what we do for a living. And if it's in an area that is harmonious, you have a much greater chance of attracting the pleasures that go with that, which can be the wealth, recognition, in addition to having a good time doing your job. So the simple rule that we're going to use tonight in looking at each of these charts, we're going to look at the dominant house. But we'll also look at the best house in each of these charts, just as a means to determine where this person could be most successful. Let's see, what information did I want you to have tonight? Here's a wonderful quote from D.H. Lawrence, who used to live up in Taos, who says, "The cosmos is a vast living body, of which we are still parts. The sun is a great heart whose tremors run through our smallest veins. The moon is a great nerve center from which we quiver forever. Who knows the power that Saturn has over us, or Venus? But it is a vital power, rippling exquisitely through us all the time." Yeah, he was a magnificent author and did not write on the subject of astrology. He was an incredible novelist. All right. In Hermetic astrology, this is review time right now. We work with 4 specific factors. They are the planets, the houses, the signs, and the aspects. And we're covering them in order over these next few weeks. Last week we discussed the importance of the planets. In tonight's class, we are focusing on the mundane houses. And it's important to understand what the houses are, because they are perhaps the most abstract part of astrology. One can certainly imagine the planets as these satellites revolving around the sun. And one can imagine the zodiac, whether it's as the constellations themselves or as the segments that stretch between the equinoxes and the solstices in 30-degree spans. The aspects, it's easy to imagine that energies from planets meet at geometric angles. Most of us learned that at around 7th grade. Not the aspects of the planets, but our geometry. But the houses, the ancients found that there was sort of a second wheel of the zodiac that fell within the wheel of the zodiac. and that it turned on a diurnal axis, that is a daily axis. And the mundane houses represent this abstract astral field of the Earth as it is receptive to the radiations of planetary energies. Now, in our language, we sometimes refer to the houses in a chart as departments of life because they govern very specific activities, which we're going to learn tonight as we go one by one through the houses. There are 12, which correspond to the 12 signs of the zodiac, and they are like a minor zodiac. The planets pass through these 12 houses all within a 24-hour period. So, what does Zane say? Is anyone here running water?
Seems like I hear it too. There's a fan over here trying to give you, no, I hear it.
No, I hear running water.
Yeah, that was the last one. I guess I didn't turn the knob all the way.
Okay. Maybe I don't need to get my hearing checked. As I'm told daily.
By someone near and dear, right?
Yeah, when you live with someone long enough, you actually become mute to the tone of their voice. You only lose a small spectrum of hearing.
When they're going on and on. Otherwise, your hearing's exquisite if they're whispering in that.
Funny how that works. Talking in hushed tones on the telephone. All right. Zane says, a clearer conception of the mundane houses may be had by facing the south and imagining one's self the hub of a great wheel, the circumference of which passes directly from the horizon in the east, on the left under one's feet, around to the horizon in the west, on the right, from thence directly overhead and back to the eastern horizon again. Let one then imagine this great wheel to possess 12 spokes, radiating into the sky from the point where one stands as a center. These spokes equally spaced about the wheel. Such a wheel accurately pictures the 12 houses of a horoscope, the dividing line between two houses called a cusp, being represented by each spoke. All right, stand up, everyone. It's time for calisthenics. Space yourself. Now you need to face south, which is that direction. Hold your arms out from your side without smacking your neighbor. And imagine a line running from the top of your head up into the heavens and from the bottom of your feet down through the earth and out the other side. And then imagine your left arm, the energies from that extending out into space to the eastern horizon where the sun rises, and your right arm extending out to the western horizon where the sun sets. And now between that cross, those 4 quadrants, imagine 2 additional spokes coming out from each of those. And there you have it. That is the mundane wheel. Once you've imagined that, you can sit down again. If you haven't been able to visualize it, you must stand until you do.
So your head's on the south
Yes,
and your feet are on
the north. So, that was in astrological signatures, if you want to go back and do the research. The way this works, I want to give you an approximation. Let's say it is Saturday, the first day of fall, when days and nights are of equal length, and we're at the equator. Someplace, let's say we're in Quito, Ecuador, close to the equator. At 6 a.m., the sun is found here. From 6 to 8 a.m., it's moving through this compartment. From 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., it's in this compartment. It goes from the 12th house to the 11th. From 10 a.m. until noon, it stands directly overhead. Then it's in the 10th house. If you were born at the equator on the spring or fall equinox, between noon and 2 p.m., you'll find that you have the sun in the 9th house. Between 2 and 4, it's in the 8th house. Between 4 and 6 p.m., when it sets below the western horizon again, it is in the 7th house. Every 2 hours, 6 to 8, 6th house. 8 to 10, 5th house. 10 to midnight, it's in the 4th house. At midnight, the sun is at the very bottom of the chart. From midnight to 2 a.m., the sun is in the 3rd house. And from 2 until 4 a.m., it's in the 2nd house. From 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., it's in the 1st house. If you look at your chart, you know what time you were born, you have a pretty good approximate of where the sun is. That is the planet that's most visible and most reliable to us in determining this. All the other planets are moving at different speeds. But again, knowing the time of your birth, you can pretty much determine what house your sun will be in. People think it's some remarkable trick. When they tell me, oh, you're Sag, let's see, I'm Sag with Aries rising, and I say, well, you were born probably around 1 o'clock. There is no great trick here. If you looked at enough charts, you know what the arrangement is. Okay. So this is what it looks like. We're looking south when we're looking at a chart. The eastern horizon, which is the first spoke of the wheel, when we point it east, this is the cusp of the 1st house. All of you know by now this is considered to be very important, and it is the place in a chart where planets move above it, which is why the ancients called it the ascendant. The sign which is found on the cusp of the 1st house, we call the rising sign. The ancient Latin word for this, actually it comes from the Greek, was horoscopios, translated into the Latin, which means, you can see the word oro, which means hour, and scopius, which means to view. So the horoscopius, or the ascendant, was changed every hour or every 2 hours.
Christopher, quick question.
Yes.
When you look at the chart, though, when I look at a map, west is east. West is to my left.
Right.
When I'm looking at a birth chart,
It's the other direction.
Right.
Right, and keep in mind that the ancients looked to the south because the zodiac extends out from the equator, slightly north and slightly south in parts. So the planets move in that narrow band between 23 degrees north and 23 degrees south. So in any northerly latitude, which is where astrology developed in the Near East and even in Egypt, and in Crete, they were all looking to the south to see the movement of the planets. So it's a different orientation, and it's a purely cultural experience.
Oh, I thought it was a mirror. Somehow it was a mirror image of them.
No, it would be just as if we, instead of looking at maps using north, which is the direction the compass points as our directional, would be looking to the south, and primarily because that's where the activity is. So this other line, which is the cusp of the 7th house, which is opposite we have the ascendant and the descendant. It's at this point, when the sun sinks below this point, it is sunset. It's happening right about now. And it's almost 7 o'clock, and it's just 2 days before the equinox. Why 7 instead of 6? Thank you. The first problem in calculating an astrological chart is what time is being used at the time of the birth. All right. The next point, which is directly below your feet, is called the nadir. It's the lowest point, and this is where the sun is at midnight. It is the cusp of the 4th house. And directly overhead is the MC, or medium cele, the middle of the heavens. We call it the midheaven. This is the cusp of the 10th house. So each of these 4 points I've just shown you, which you imagined when you were doing this, are the angles in a chart. Ascendant, midheaven, descendant, imum celi, or nadir. They are the cusp of the 4 angular houses. In astrology, however, only 2 of them have great value. In fact, so much so, we give them the power of planets. And Fred asked a question last week about midheaven and ascendant. And we do not measure aspects to any of the other house cusp in a chart except for the 1st and the 10th. And it's from those aspects to the 1st and the 10th that we derive the power of the ascendant and midheaven in a chart. Let's see, do I have anything else to say about them? Not that I haven't said, other than the fact that the midheaven and the ascendant are psychically perceived as a silver cord moving through the astral body by psychics. The ascendant... Do all of you remember the story of Peter Pan?
Sure.
Remember when his shadow got detached and Wendy had to sew it back on? Mm-hmm. That's how I think of this. The ascendant is where the shadow is tied to us. It's the connecting wire of our soul to the physical body. The midheaven is the other end of the kite. That's where that line that tethers us to the physical connects to the higher self. And it has to do with our goals, our ambitions, our life mission, and everything that we aspire to. So those are the 2 memorable points in the chart. So much so we give them the power of planets. Now, the way we need to understand the houses when we're looking at a chart is Zane describes the houses as being an auditorium. Last week we looked at the planets, and I explained to you the planets are like musical tones. It's music, it is air vibrating at a particular frequency, but it sounds different to us, whether it's on a trumpet or on a viol. The signs, which we discuss next week, are like those different instruments on which that particular tone is being played. The auditorium in which we listen to the music are the houses of our chart. The curious thing, though, is this music is being played outside the auditorium. We're on the inside of the auditorium. So how well you hear the music depends on where you got a seat. Here's the band moving around the outdoors. There's the indoor of the auditorium. If you are sitting by a wide open door, you're going to get that band in full volume. If you are by a window, it's going to come in with average strength. And if you've ever been an apartment dweller, you know that you can still hear your neighbor's stereo, even if it's separated by a solid wall. It may be muffled, unless it's a Supreme song or something you memorized in your youth, you may not recognize the words, but chances are you'll at least get the bass line. So, this is how the houses function. The angular houses, which I just described to you, which are with the angles, house number 1, house number 4, house number 7, and house number 10, are these wide open doors. Planets found there express a large volume of energy. The windows are the succedent houses, which succeed the angular, and they are 2, 5, 8, and 11. They express with average volume. And the cadent houses tend towards being weaker. They are the solid wall, which are 3, 6, 9, and 12, except for the fact that both Albert Benjamin and Michel Gauquelin, who did the research back in the 70s and 80s in France, determined that planets in cadent houses, if they are very close to aspecting angles, they take on greater strength. So there's a slight twist to that common rule that we use in astrology when we're calculating Astrodynes. Let's talk about the first house. What do we want to know? Those of you who are more proficient, give us a few keywords.
Physical appearance.
Physical appearance, which would also correspond to the body, the physical body. Personality and the personal interest are all governed by the first house. What else? Let's see, did we leave anything out? Health, temperament. So, a person with a dominant first house, what would they be concerned with?
Themselves.
Yes, it is a personal house. So they're concerned with themselves, but they might be concerned with either their health, bordering, if it's afflicted, they might border on hypochondria. If it's harmonious, they may be a gym bunny. Somebody who's always going and working out, or they might be somebody who's constantly experimenting with diet or nutrition. Depending on the planets in the first house, one could be focused in on appearance. And how do we affect our appearance? Do you know what the one thing is that separates humans from the other mammals?
Clothing.
Clothing. We are the only species of mammal that alters our appearance through clothing and accessories. That's it. Other animals have learned levels of vocalization. It used to be previously considered in anthropology that humans were unique because of their ability to communicate. But all other animals communicate on some levels with one another. Empathy used to be considered to be the one trait exclusive to humans. But have you ever had a dog come comfort you when you weren't feeling well? Or I've seen so many videos now on YouTube of crows coming to feed kitties and other animals that might be considered mortal enemies looking out after one another. So we know that empathy is not unique to us as humans. But there is no other species that can alter its appearance the way that humans do. So, on to fashion. This is the chart of Bill Blass. What do we know about him? At age 15, he began sewing and selling evening gowns. Couture, fashion. Dominant first house. What are the planets in the first house?
Venus and Neptune.
And the co-ruler after Neptune? The moon, because we have Cancer on the ascendant here. So, curiously enough, he started off with women's fashion. He was known for tailoring an innovative combination of textures and patterns, and died of throat cancer before his 80th birthday. So let's look at the Astrodynes of this chart. Dominant first house. Its top in power, having 22.7% of the energy of the chart. As I also mentioned to you, in terms of money and fashion, or not money and fashion, money and finance, where do we look to be successful?
You mean which houses? For finances?
Well, no, the general rule for tonight's class was you take your personality and you express it through your most harmonious house, and therein you can find success. So with fashion, we would naturally look to the first house. And if we look at these numbers here in terms of harmony, the first house is not only dominant with the planets of, if we go back, the planets of beauty and imagination, costume, in the first house. We can see this is somebody who, made his own empire in the 70s and 80s around fashion, though he started much earlier than that. So, we can see that rule at work here. Now, if we look for the dominant planet in a chart, what do we do when we have the angles most powerful? We take note and we drop down till we find the first planet. And in this case, it is Neptune. And what are the urges of Neptune? Illusion, but we call them the utopian urges because what do they want? A better world. In this case, this man's imagination was being used to make a better world, or in his case, a better dressed world. Because of time constraints, we're going to move right on. But you're getting to see right now, how do we find these pieces in a chart? Let's talk about the second house. In the second house of a chart, it governs money, finance, income. Remember, it's both income and outflow. It also will represent your habits of spending and or habits of saving. It corresponds to the things you collect. These are your assets, your personal possessions. And on a more abstract level, it governs your values. Ginger Rogers. Some of you are old enough to remember her. I actually saw her in Santa Fe in 1982 at the Santa Fe Film Festival. She was dressed up almost like a birthday package in a big gown with an even bigger bow. Yeah, from my seat, I may not, it was at the Lensic. I may not have seen it as well from there, but Ginger Rogers. Let's look at the second house of this chart. Neptune and the Sun, 21 Cancer, 22 Cancer, Cancer on the ascendant. So Neptune's the chief ruler, the Sun is the co-ruler, and the Moon is also the co-ruler. So there's a lot of energy here in and around Wealth. Well, what do we know about Ginger Rogers? By 1945, she was the highest paid performer in Hollywood.
Why is it that Neptune is the chief ruler?
It's closest to the cusp. Thank you, Johanna. You're such a good student.
Thank you.
Yes. Now, and you are too, Laura, because you asked some of the best questions. Ginger Rogers made 73 movies. Again, income. What does Neptune rule as far as professions are concerned? Film. Yeah. And acting in general, the whole realm of theater and drama. What did she do? She invested her six-figure salary in blue-chip stocks and land, including a 1,100-acre ranch in Oregon known as the 4 R's, Rogers Rogue River Ranch.
Doesn't it also, Neptune also have a lot to do with music? The arts in general?
You know, the arts in general, it certainly has to do with performing of any type. So to some degree, that could be music. It might express through things such as opera or light operas, where one is acting on stage as well as singing. Though music, all of the arts generally are attributed to Venus. Though Neptune has to do more with the film and dramatic arts. Music is considered to come under the rulership of the Moon and Saturn. Why Saturn?
Because of the structure, the organization.
Thank you. Would you say that really loud, Michelle?
Repetitive structure?
Practice, practice, practice. Talk about repetitive structure. Look at Bach any day of the week. That is mathematical in nature.
Well, Neptune would be more art, illusion, creating illusion and using illusion to create feeling.
But that's what art is, because it creates the illusion of something that we're not, and that's what attracts people to the arts.
I think all of the arts are influenced by Neptune because even visual artists have to be able to see something in their mind and then have the ability to translate that into sculpture, painting, drawing, or some other form. So Neptune's definitely engaged in all of the arts. Let's look at her Astrodynes. Dominant power is the moon, which we would expect. Neptune is high up there in her chart. If you look at these, the moon is definitely dominant, but the sun and Neptune are only 0.2% apart in power. Rather minimal. Now, if we look at the chart, it's a dominant second house. So what was this woman's great driving interest?
Money.
Yes, money, wealth. And let's try and find the harmony. Oh, she doesn't have any.
Sort of.
You see it in the 7th house?
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
70.77.
Yeah. The greatest harmony in this chart is it is a dominant second house. It is also a harmonious second house. What was she able to achieve besides an enormous film career? Wealth. Now, there are people out there that debate whether she was a very nice person or not. She was a radical conservative and very active. She and her mother were very active during the McCarthy era in terms of blackballing singling out and destroying the careers of other people in Hollywood.
Really?
Something we wouldn't have guessed from that big bright bow. But
she's got Gemini on the first house, which is, what's her, Pollux?
Castor and Pollux.
Yeah.
Huh.
So she's a Gemini, so she could, project either good or,
Huh.
yeah, tricks.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Well, that Pluto there in the first house too.
yes,
Drastic.
drastic and
And
politically
groups, right.
motivated.
Yeah.
So,
Just a little.
of course, at the time when that was happening, it was a mob frenzy that was going on. It was a
Yeah.
movement during the beginnings of the Cold War. And so many people thought what was going on was a really good thing, regardless of who was harmed in the process.
Interesting.
So, have you all grasped the second house?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the third house. Somebody give me some keywords.
Brothers and sisters.
Brothers and sisters.
Short journeys.
Short journeys.
Early education?
You got it.
Communication.
Communication and your private thoughts.
Yeah.
So these are all really, it's neighbors in the neighborhood also. So,
Processes.
anything we left out? Oh, telephone call and mental processes, yeah. The third house is marvelous to watch because it gives us real clues to the individual's mental processes. How your brain works. So let's look at a third house personality. Let me start funneling through some of my charts here. I have chosen Sandra Day O'Connor.
I like her.
You don't like her?
I do like
Okay.
her.
And you probably like her because she's intelligent. But she's also, she is a woman that helped break the gender barrier in the Supreme Court.
Uranus in the third house.
She is the retired United States Supreme Court Justice. I believe she too was very conservative. Not unexpected with Saturn conjunct your ascendant.
Saturn was her strongest, the most powerful planet.
Yes, so here we have Saturn in the first house as the dominant planetary power.
Very discordant.
What does Saturn have to do with? Measurements, accounting, and also Saturn is one of the planets considered to rule law. Structure, the rules of things. But the third house is, again, this shows somebody whose great emphasis was towards communication, writing, careful decision making. And she wrote a book with her brother about her childhood experiences. She grew up actually in southern Arizona and wrote about that. So we can see here that she was not just a Supreme Court justice, but an authoress. Now, I found myself marveling at that chart because if you look at it on your paper, everything except 2 planets fall below the horizon. So you wonder how this woman could have risen to such high status. And the thing is, she does have a strong midheaven. It is 4th in power in her chart. So what is going on is 2 of those planets, which are in the 3rd house, Venus and Uranus, are opposing her midheaven and therefore adding energy to it. These 2 planets here are adding power to the midheaven. Saturn, her dominant planet, is squaring it. And it's amazing, with that degree of discord, look at the total in this chart. To me, the really interesting thing in life is when someone has a chart like this, where we are, hard-pressed to find the harmonies in it, actually goes forth and makes something of their life.
There's a lot of challenges in that chart.
Right. And if you think about it, it's much like going to the gym, that one doesn't get muscles unless they actually lift the weights.
Right.
Going there and looking at them doesn't do that. But the actual, doing the exercise gives one strength. And so when you have a chart like this, you just can't sit back and moan about what life has dealt you. You just get out there and make muscle out of every experience you have. So, dominant third house. Hard pressed to figure out how she was so successful in her career.
Well, Libra in the 10th house.
Is, of course, justice.
Right. So,
And she took advantage of that. The most harmonious house in her chart
it's Capricorn.
is
Well,
the 12th house.
how did she come to be noted by Reagan? Wasn't it Reagan who appointed her?
I actually
Was
don't
it through
remember.
her writings? I mean, perhaps she was publishing articles, and I could see where she was, she was writing and.
Yeah, I think if I had had the time to read the biography, I could answer all of those questions. But it had to be through her writing. And what do they call it? There's a specific word when judges write
An opinion?
when they write their opinion.
Right.
So
That would be.
chances are her opinions. Now, these are publicly expressed opinions. These are privately expressed opinions. So even again, it's hard to imagine how that
But
was
Mercury rules the 9th house. And
Yes.
Venus, the ruler over 10th house, is down there in the 3rd house. So there's got to be some connection between
connection
that 3rd
between
house
those.
and the.
And where she gained her reputation also in the Supreme Court is she was very conservative. But there were other Supreme Court justices she did not want to be identified with. So she always made sure when she was voting on a subject, along a conservative line that another court justice was voting on, that she would write a separate opinion from his, just in order to have that distance drawn between herself and others.
Well, that would be that Uranus, wouldn't it? Differentiate.
Yeah, that would be a good guess.
Yeah.
We're voting the same way, but I want people to know why I'm doing this, which is different than your reasons. So that's, a great example of the 3rd house personality. You notice I slipped in here that she wrote a book with her brother.
Right.
3rd house.
Sibling,
Yeah.
Sibling.
So, very interesting chart. That dominant Saturn. I mean, even that outfit says serious.
Yeah.
She would not, well, besides in court, all they wear are those gowns. But nevertheless, I'm sure there was no frivolous going on under the gown. Tell me about the fourth house, someone.
The home,
Family,
Parents.
father,
Real estate,
usually the father, real estate, property, land, mines, farms.
holdings.
And it is also, at least in horary astrology, referred to as beginnings and endings. And it's oftentimes looked at as being representing both early childhood and the end of life. I have less understanding about it as being the end of life, but one can certainly see how the early childhood is marked in a fourth house.
Saturn, which rules the father figure, is in the second house.
Now, in this chart, this is the chart of Charles Windsor, Prince of Wales. 4 planets in the fourth house. Neptune and Venus conjunct in Libra. Mercury and the Sun are in Scorpio out of orb of aspect to one another. Curiously, for someone who would be king, the Sun is the weakest planet in this chart.
and he may not be king.
And he may not be, because his mama could live forever. Now, why do you think I chose this chart?
Well, he has a lot of land.
This man owns a lot of land. His estates are really quite vast. It's just part of the English aristocracy that you become titled to particular tracts of land. But again, his chief interest in school was architecture and historic conservation, history, one's roots, one's family roots, one's genealogical lines are all ruled by the fourth house. So in the case of his work, one not only has to be able to prove bloodlines and genealogical lines for aristocratic position, but his interest being historic conservation. What is even less known about him is he is a champion of organic farming.
And he's awakening the world to climate change.
Environmental
Yeah.
studies. So, he has been one of the vanguard of climatic change. All of this is governed by the fourth house. You can see where this individual's interest is focused.
And the Neptune being the chief ruler, he has a very idealistic or visionary
Even
perspective.
mystical.
Mystical.
On one of his
He's been
lands,
right.
they do biodynamic gardening in the tradition of Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah.
So he's clearly into things that may just be slightly outside of the Church of England.
Totally.
Do you have a grasp on the fourth house? Here again, we're looking at a personality and just seeing, okay, what's at work here? Well, the dominant planet in his chart is the moon, which we saw earlier fell in the 10th house of his mother. So really what is predominant in his life is his mother And again, the need being in the 10th house to have to keep up appearances to the extent that one can, being, such a public figurehead. Now, he was born basically 2 days before the full moon. So they are in opposite signs. He's got the sun in Scorpio, the moon in Taurus in his chart. And they are out of orb from aspect, being 22 degrees apart.
But the moon is void of course. Right?
No, the moon is void
No,
of
it
course
is an opposition.
when it is
Right,
in
doesn't
the
make any difference.
last degrees of a sign before moving into the first degree of the
Right.
next sign.
Exactly.
So with the moon dominant, we would say that this is actually a very sensitive and a very nurturing man. His interests are in caretaking. Well, how does that manifest in what he does around land, property, homes, buildings? Historic conservation is caretaking of architecture, preserving certain estates, and again, organic or biodynamic farming is a way of taking care of the land. Alerting people to climate change is a way of taking care of the larger orb on which we live. Now, if we were to try and decide where this man should be making money, the most harmonious house in the chart
Through his kids.
is the 5th house.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, we might say, yes, you can prosper or profit through your children. Start selling those photos online. Or the 5th house is also things which have to do with entertainment and the arts. Well, he doesn't work in that field. But it also has to do with speculation. One stocks and bonds. Well, I don't really know. I imagine he's on a pension. But he may also have people that are managing his own assets, where if he were involved in speculative matters, chances are this is somebody who could become, very successful. Or Mars, Jupiter conjunct in the 5th house in Sagittarius, the racetrack,
Horses.
on the horses,
Yeah.
betting on the ponies. Not that I ever advise that to anyone as a good career.
The
But
whole family likes horses.
right. Well,
So-
I imagine he's probably the one member of the family that you'd want to see who he was picking.
Yeah.
Because my guess is he probably has a system that really works well.
Well, Chris, it was interesting that his 4th house is slightly discordant. And he has been kind of a laughing stock for some of his endeavors. I don't think people have really appreciated his, his gardening and some of his interests until, lately they seem to express more interest in him, but he's pretty...
But he's also a Scorpio. He keeps his feelings pretty much underneath the surface.
Yeah, he plays his cards close to his vest.
Right. And
But again, Vicki, what you point out is important, because the most discordant aspect in his chart is the opposition from Neptune to the midheaven.
Right. And
So he's somebody that would be
goofy.
a lightning rod for what other people perceive as being, moonbeam
Yeah.
ideas.
Right.
Yet in the reality of it all, he's actually the visionary. He's the one who is having the vision before the rest of the world catches on. So that's probably what he has to suffer through, is being at the vanguard of ideas, but it being, posthumously that they discover that this was, this brilliant visionary.
I think he also has problems in relationships, personal relationships.
Well, Neptune
Because
conjunct
Neptune,
Venus
right, exactly.
can make her a hopeless romantic.
That's right.
And he had that long affair with Camilla, and finally married her and got ridicule for that out in the open.
Yeah.
And the trouble with Diana, right?
Yeah, and in this chart, even though the seventh house is harmonious, it is one of the weakest houses in the chart. Has 2.6% of his power. Love affairs, on the other hand, are strong and harmonious. So, now who knows? None of us have their cottage tapped, but it's possible that when he went from a romance, a clandestine love affair with Camilla, to a marriage, that the nature of the relationship may have changed. That's the difference between a fifth house and a seventh house. Venus-Neptune conjunction can also be not only a hopeless romantic, but one can have clandestine love affairs and or unrequited love. And in this case, it was almost an arranged marriage.
Right.
The family made decisions about this because in order to have heirs to the throne, it had to be through someone of aristocratic lineage.
Meaning Diana?
Yes.
Yeah, it was arranged.
I think the House of Spencer goes back to James the First. I could be wrong, but whereas the Charles family are basically recent newcomers to England. They're of German stock. All right, let's talk about the fifth house, a subject everyone's interested in. Give me some keywords.
Children, speculation, amusements, entertainment, love affairs.
All that great stuff.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Yes, I call this the fun house. So, romance, sex. Now, sex is associated with Scorpio, which lead many people to look at the eighth house in terms of sex. But I think of it as being almost exclusively fifth house. It really indicates where one looks for their pleasures. It is the result of those pleasures being children. So fifth house can either be pro-creativity or creativity. This is basically what are you leaving behind in the world? And it's the fun house. It has to do with games, sport, entertainment, gambling, speculation. Gambling and speculation being games. So, the choice here is Bob Dylan. Now, with the Saturn and Moon conjunct in the fifth house, he may not necessarily be our idea of a sex idol, but definitely a consummate performer and entertainer. He has remained in the spotlight for decades with his music.
Very influential.
And And that is a key word, because if we think of progeny, the fifth house as progeny, Bob Dylan influenced a lot of people musically. The other thing that many people don't know about Bob Dylan is the fact that he is a visual artist as well. And he's published 3 books of his drawings, and his work is exhibited in major galleries. So this is somebody who's has sort of pan-creativity. We have Saturn, the Moon, Uranus, and Jupiter. Saturn and the Moon are conjunct in Taurus. Well, you know, they're all
Yeah.
riding along here.
And, I mean, and
Let's
he's
see.
noted for being edgy too. You know, the Uranus, he was a real,
Groundbreaker in music.
Yeah, these are all conjunct. So this is very powerful. And there was a period in 1941, had he been born a little bit earlier, he could have had the Sun and Venus all in Taurus. There is, among 1941 births, this stellium in Taurus. And they are incredibly creative, focused individuals.
he's got that Venus trine as MC too. So that means he can't miss with the arts.
No. In the area of career, we have a Libra-ruled midheaven. Venus is at 12 Gemini, forming a trine to the midheaven. So, yeah, can't miss with the arts. But let's look at the
We just had
Astrodynes.
the 50th anniversary of his first album coming out, and he released a new album just this last
Really?
week.
Yeah.
50th anniversary.
Wow.
Well, as I said, for 5
Yeah,
decades.
there you go. Right.
And he has lots of kids.
Does he?
Yeah.
Oh, he does?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Well, just go to
Yeah. But again, curiously, this chart has 7 planets below the horizon.
Yeah. Well,
There's
he
a
has
lot about
to
him
help-
we don't know.
He's a bit of a recluse, isn't he?
Yes.
I imagine we think that, but he's probably just somebody who's having fun all the time.
Oh, okay.
We think of him as a recluse because we're not seeing him having fun.
Okay.
If you have a dominant 5th house in your chart, what do you want to do?
Have a good time.
You want to play. Play, play, play. You don't want to grow up.
Neptune, not being there, Neptune doesn't like to work very hard, much more in philosophy, and he's got Neptune in the 9th house, which also makes him sort of a philosopher.
Mhm.
So,
Oh, yeah, real visionary.
And a utopian.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly
Where
remember-
the word utopian comes into play. He's been trying to improve society,
right.
a la Woody Guthrie and all that
Right.
legacy.
I mean, I still love listening to Bob Dylan.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I sometimes can't quite figure out what the words mean, but
He also had.
they
a
seemed like a good
religious
idea at the
conversion,
time.
That 9th house, visibility of his religious conversion and.
Went from
Oh,
Judaism to
yeah.
Christianity, or
Or vice versa.
Became a
Or-
born-again Christian.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it was.
born Jewish, and I think he was Zimmerman was the
Zimmerman.
birth name. Yeah.
What a character.
Yeah, what an amazing man. Look at that 5th house. Leaves behind lots of progeny. Songs, albums, children, artwork.
And was it harmonious?
Let's take a look. 5th house. What would we tell this man to do with the 5th house? Not only dominant, but harmonious.
Yeah.
This person could make money from entertainment, from performance, from the art community. Dominant ascendant, but discordant. The ascendant is his most discordant point among his planets.
Jupiter's
Not classically handsome, but he was charismatic, or is charismatic, I should say. Don't need to talk about him in past tense. So, the dominant planet, though, is the Mercury. So what's he trying to do with his music?
Communicate.
Communicate. It's all about the words. And he took communication into a fifth house environment through art, through music, through a performance, and was able to parlay that into a fortune for himself.
Are you cold?
Yeah.
I can turn the air conditioner down.
Do we know which aspect in his chart was the most powerful?
Sure.
Because earlier you said Saturn and the Moon were music and they're conjunct, and I'm just wondering if that's...
Well, the most powerful aspect in his chart is also a discordant aspect. And that is the fact that Mercury at 23 degrees Gemini, 2 minutes, opposes his ascendant, Sagittarius, 2018. Probably why I always know he's saying something important, but I can't always figure it out.
Neither could Emmy Lou Harris. She tried to sing backup for him one time and it just didn't gel. So she
Okay.
said she'd never sing with him again. So,
Joan Baez had the same experience.
yeah.
Okay. So coupling up with others, doing things in partnership,
Doesn't work.
they're not always talking the same language somehow. And that is the most powerful aspect in his chart, but the most discordant. He is driven to communicate, but it's not always understood.
No.
All right, somebody talk to me about the sixth house.
Employers, employees, services, work,
Servers, animals.
yeah.
I like this. All right.
Nutrition, diets, health.
Criticism.
Yep. Work, employment, service, workplace, colleagues, coworkers, employees, tenants, diet, nutrition, food, illness, and small pets. These are your dogs and cats. They're not your cattle and horses.
And if you have
It's not your livestock, which is the 12th house.
And if you have pets or in your sixth house, if it's dominant, you shouldn't have any small dogs or cats.
No.
Why?
It just doesn't work.
If you have what?
I have a dominant sixth house and I've always had pets, whether I
You do?
wanted them or not.
Oh.
You should
Yeah,
have
that's,
pets.
you know, it's
You have
my,
dominant sex.
one of my
Well,
strongest
it's conjunct
houses.
Jupiter or something like that.
And animals are always adopting me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too, but I always take care of until I find another house for him.
Okay. Yeah, I somehow decided that dogs
There
and
you go.
cats were an alien species that came to
Right.
Earth to enslave humans. And have been very
And
successful
they were very successful in it, yes.
at colonizing the planet.
I love animals, but they always have to go.
So, let's look at a sixth house chart. This is the chart of Yves Saint Laurent.
He's got a more loaded sixth house than
You
I
do?
have.
Yeah.
He's got Jupiter in the 10th.
He was successful at working himself to death.
Was he born in
So,
1948?
no. 36, 12 years earlier. So the Jupiter makes that movement every 12 years.
Yeah.
And he'll be the same Chinese astrological sign as you, born 12 years earlier.
Yeah, remarkable man. He was the protege of Christian Dior. He succeeded him when Dior died in 1957. He was the first designer to use ethnic models on the runways. Yeah, pretty amazing. If you go back and look at old photos from the 60s. He was the first. And he was probably one of the first to incorporate ethnic design, be it Japanese, be it Russian, be it African, into his Moroccan, into his fashions. As I say here, he referenced non-European cultures in his work. And he worked tirelessly on his new collections. He retired in 2002. Basically, it was a time when fashion was somewhat collapsing. Couture was being replaced by prêt-à-porter, basically ready-to-wear clothes, and so he decided, time to back out. And he died from brain cancer in 2008, 6 years later. So, let's look at these Astrodynes.
So now where would you get fashion from that sixth house?
Exactly. Other than...
He's got Venus there, but
Just his
still.
son.
But look at the aspect here of Mercury to Venus.
Yeah.
Mercury is 1834. Venus is 1834. Mercury is 1839. And they are conjunct, and this is the most powerful aspect in his chart.
Yeah, and they're close trine to that Jupiter up in the 10th.
So
He gets noticed for that.
Right, and they're in Leo,
Yeah.
It may not be fashion, it was probably actually costume, what he did. Leo is theatrical, and the stuff, I have to take that back. Yves Saint Laurent designed every year tuxedos, which we don't think of as costume, they're truly formal wear. But a lot of the other stuff he created was truly, if you're going to wear that, you're not wearing that on the bus. I'm sorry. You don't wear that and take public transportation. It's costume.
Well, Saturn in the first house would have inclined him to formality. I would think.
Yeah, and I think that came across through the smoking, through the tuxedos that he designed every single year. And he was also, the other thing most people don't know about him is he suffered from, I think, bipolar disorder. Yeah, he was manic depressive and went through profound depths of depression.
Look at that moon opposition Pluto and Mars.
Yeah, the moon opposes Mars, which is the most discordant aspect. And the moon opposes Pluto, which is moderately discordant.
And the
So,
Saturn,
moods would have been very intense. I think he was also very hard on his coworkers. Again, he wanted staff that would be willing to work 16, 18-hour days like he would. So if you worked in his studio, you would be expected to keep up the same pace as he did. So let's look here. The dominant planet is Jupiter in the 10th house, which is a wealth builder. The dominant house is the 6th house, which is both work, but also it's one of the houses of health. And he lived to 72, which used to be kind of an average age for men, but Now that's considered,
Fairly young.
yeah, fairly young. The greatest harmony in this chart is the 10th house. So, where was his real skill?
To be recognized.
To be recognized, to be promoted, to rise to the top, to be meteoric in his career. And then like a shooting star, you know, he sort of passed from the public view. Tell me about the 7th house. We're now going above the horizon, and all of these houses, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, are a reflection of the lower houses, 1 through 6. First house is self. What does the 7th house represent? Others. It is your others, and sometimes called your significant others. The others is your partners, be they close companions, be they partners in marriage, partners in business. If you're in a business that involves clientele, it becomes your clients. But it's the others in your life that you interface with. So, marriage, companionship, partnership, allies. But being opposite the house of self, it is also your opponents and your competitors. Something that's open enemies is an old term that was used for this. All right. Now, we normally don't think of Wes Craven as from the perspective of his relationships. What do we know about this man? Are there any horror film?
I don't know who it is.
I
Okay.
don't either.
All right. This is a older generation, though he is older than most of you. He was born in 1939. And is basically a director-producer.
Is he the one that just passed away?
I don't think so. No, he's not the one that jumped off the Vincent Thomas Bridge. But you've probably heard of his movies, but have all had the good taste not to go.
What were they?
Nightmares on Elm Street.
Yeah. Nightmare on Elm Street and everything, all of the Freddy horror
Well,
movies.
I really don't like this guy.
No.
He kept me awake when my daughter saw those movies at slumber party.
And you forgot his name. But you
Well, I
probably
had
remember
no
Freddy,
idea who
though.
he was, but Freddy, yes,
Yeah.
Freddy Krueger will live in my memory.
Exactly.
forever.
All of the Freddy Krueger films, it was a theme that continued to spawn more horror films. But I didn't choose this chart for that. But primarily, what was interesting about this dominant 7th house is it's somebody who's had multiple marriages. We have Venus and Pluto conjunct. This particular aspect is the most powerful aspect in his chart. No, actually it's not. His most powerful aspect is a parallel between the Sun and Uranus. How is that for making quirky films about death and dying?
Oh my God, yeah.
That's the most powerful aspect. So we can see how he had this whole cult genre going.
So is his 7th house harmonious?
Well, let's take a look.
No. Yeah. Oh, it's not.
Not harmonious. That might account for 3.
Yeah.
Someone once said to me, the secret of a long marriage is you don't divorce.
You know, they knew what they were talking
They did. And then somebody said to me today, it's that, or you don't both think about it at the same time. So, dominant planet. Yeah. What does Pluto rule?
The underworld.
The underworld, darkness, conspiracies, really creepy things, but also universal welfare. I don't know if he's actually a philanthropist or not. Whether he gives money to, psychological institutions for restoring young children to mental poison balance.
Freddy Krueger visits their nightmares.
But there is. I mean, if we look at the dominant planets, they are Pluto and Saturn.
Pluto's conjunct the 8th
1 degree Taurus, 1 degree Leo. So that aspect is also very powerful in his chart, and it happens to be the most discordant aspect. What did this man do with his own terrors? He shared them with everyone else.
Yeah.
Nice, what a kind fellow.
Now, this chart is curious to me because, of course, we want to look to the greatest harmony to see where one could be successful. And the 5th house, although it's clearly active in his career, is not harmonious. The 3rd house is. Well, guess what? Writer-director.
I was going to say, he'd be a writer.
Good to go? All right. The 8th house. Oh, I'm giving you clues here. Death, the end of things, spirit world, metaphysics, inheritances, legacies, taxes. You know, when I was a child, my mother used to say, when I would tell her, she'd ask me a question, and I'd give her an answer, and she'd say, "Are you certain?" And I'd say, "Yes, I'm certain." And then she'd say, "The only thing that's certain is death and taxes."
I heard that a lot.
Yeah, and as a child, it's like, I'm not thinking about either of those things right now. But as you get older, you do discover that there is a certainty to both of them. But the 8th house, just as, think of this, the 2nd house is your personal wealth. The 8th house is other people's resources. This is your partner's money. It's also your indebtedness, which is a public record. Anyone you're applying to rent a property from, buy a property from, or get a job from has access to this information. It is called your credit report. And I believe even your taxes are available for public release if you sign a form. I think we've been trying to get Romney to do that.
He hasn't signed.
He hasn't signed.
Well, as far back as he's been asked.
Uh-huh. So, this is not Romney's chart. Any Catholics or ex-Catholics in the room? Then you won't know who this guy is
the guy
either.
that-
Oh, yeah, the stigmata.
Stigmata.
Yeah, Padre Pio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An amazing man. He was just, I believe, canonized last year. He had been blessed or beatified for decades, since the 1960s. And in the last year, he was actually canonized by the church. He joined the Capuchin branch of the Franciscans at age 16. he was a stigmatic in the succession of St. Francis of Assisi, where he bore the symbols of the wounds of Christ. He underwent rigorous testing both by scientists and by the church itself, because, the church is very wary about stuff like that. And he was actually somewhat suppressed and stuck away in a quiet little corner of Italy where people would travel from all over to visit him. He had other psychic gifts. He was a healer. He had the gift of bilocation. Two people would report having had lunch with him at the same time on the same day. And he had the levitation, was one of his gifts. He had the gift of distant viewing, what we call clairvoyance. Also, he had the ability to see into the hearts of people and discern their character. What's called in Catholicism the reading of souls. And the poor brothers that lived in the monastery with him would be kept up at night sometimes because he would be thrashing around in his room with demons at night. These are all 8th house experiences. All of this comes under the psychic matter and the otherworldly nature of the 8th house. Should he have been a monk? Let's see.
That 12th house and 8th house, he sure should have been.
Look at, you're good, Vicki. You should be teaching this stuff. What, monks are ruled by the 12th house, the house of solitude. And look at that 12th house. 25.82 Harmodines.
Well, there's a trine between those 8th house planets and the 12th house.
Whoops. All right. In the 8th house, at least with Uranus, we've got Uranus at 8 Libra, forming a trine to Mercury, Pluto, and the Sun.
It's got Gemini intercepted, though.
That's right, all those things in the 8th are intercepted in Gemini.
Mm-hmm.
Behind, under,
Well, they tried to keep him out of the sun, didn't they?
yeah.
Same thing.
Sandwich him in
Sam
between.
had all those planets intercepted in the 8th house.
Right, but he turned out to be a mass murderer.
Exactly, yeah.
But
Who was that?
Son of Sam,
Oh,
David
Son of Sam.
Berkovitz.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. I didn't want to use his chart tonight because I find Padre Pio much more
Well,
fascinating.
yeah, it is interesting because those are considered classic psychic houses.
Right.
And all those are psychic abilities.
And Son of Sam also had them in Gemini. Those planets were also in Gemini. But that's a great comparison.
Yeah.
Two extremes, very similar things, but it also shows how the will is applied.
Right.
In this case, this is somebody who was clearly also devotionally motivated. He was driven in his faith. And so his 8th house experiences were everything that had to do with psychic and spiritual development. Son of Sam, I don't have the chart right here to look at, but very similar. A stellium of planets in Libra in the 8th house.
Libra?
But he actually, Gemini in the 8th house, but he actually, the voices he heard told him to do bad things.
But he definitely had the Mercury and Mars conjunction in that 8th house. too.
Okay,
'Cause that
right.
was-
And that,
Awesome.
add Mars. That's all it takes. Therein lies the difference here. And here, if we look at that conjunction from the Sun to Pluto, this is the most powerful aspect in his chart. And wherever you have a conjunction like that, it shows something prominent. This is the power urges are united to the universal welfare urges.
And that's stronger than the Mercury in there too?
It is. Mercury is stronger than Pluto, but only by 1%. Now, there's a downside to all of this. Because when people experience spontaneous healings in your presence, or you're able to read their souls, I mean, there were fighters during World War II that would report on the radio seeing this bearded guy outside their plane. Yeah, they would give exact descriptions of him.
Well, it makes it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting chart.
Yeah.
One of your online listeners says Mars will do it every time.
Yes, it will. Let's talk about the ninth house. We're going to rush now towards the finish line here as we have 20 minutes left to get these other houses in. Tell me about the ninth house.
Higher education, religion, philosophy, teaching,
Long journey,
philosophy.
I think you got it all, but you said philosophy twice.
Oh, did I? Okay, well,
outdoor
you're getting
sports.
old.
You're starting to repeat. All right. Maybe I put it down twice here. No, I didn't. There you have it. But public speaking, advertising, publishing, import-export. Martha Stewart, or as we say here in New Mexico, Martha Stewart. You used to be able to find her designs at K Martha.
It's a great picture you found.
I
Golly,
love that
where did
picture.
you
You know,
find that?
you have to work hard to tease your hair that high.
Yeah.
You really do.
Oh,
Good gosh.
She did modeling when she was young.
She was. This is a picture from her modeling years.
Her daughter looks a lot like
I mean, but I'm almost expecting to hear Nancy Sinatra sing "These Boots Are Made for
Yeah.
Love." That would go with this picture, don't you think? I may have to download that. All right. Publishing, mobile, and television personality. Look at this ninth house. Mercury, Pluto, Sun. Mercury in Cancer, but Pluto and the Sun conjunct in Leo. Graduated from Barnard College with a double major in history and architectural history. What was she thinking? This isn't Charles Windsor. But
Well, her Sun conjunct Pluto up there gives her a little mass media empire, doesn't it?
it does.
Yeah.
And breadth of knowledge.
Yeah.
Breadth of knowledge. Jupiter is in the 8th house, so she's able to plumb other people's resources and turn that into a fortune. Did get in a little bit of trouble for her stock dealings. And so one of the things that is part of her reputation now is, being a jailbird.
There you go.
So,
But look at that Mars trying her MC up there, and even the Sun. So I think she actually even traded on that experience.
her
didn't
stock
she?
went up.
Yeah, right.
Now, most of us sort of feel that she was singled out for being a powerful woman in the public because we know all the,
It wasn't the first time that happened.
yeah. And those who actually, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but we do know that the dominant ruling genders are engaging in this all the time. Marta just got caught. Not that I'm saying anybody should do inside trading, but I think she is fascinating, and
She is fascinating.
you know what she was able to achieve. She is a visionary. And what is she doing? You know, I mean, in jail she probably did paper mache out of toilet paper and handkerchief art. But, you know, she's a Neptune person. She's trying to envision a better, more beautiful world where you too could raise chickens that lay colored eggs.
And
So-
Neptune's in the 11th house, having to have something in common with other people.
Right, because you know what? Almost everyone else out there is a visionary in some part that wants a more ideal, beautiful world.
All right. Good for her.
So, look at that 9th house. No doubt there is a philosophy behind everything she does. I think she probably also has her own powerful devotional life, that it's not just, you know, all media mogul, that something else must drive her as well. And look at the 8th house. Other people's money. So no doubt she can pull in backers, investors, and or know what to market. The 2nd house ruler of personal wealth, we have the moon in Sagittarius, which is publishing and media, travel. And the co-ruler, Jupiter, is in the 8th house of other people's money. So she no doubt makes money for herself, but everyone else that she may do lines for. Tenth house, career, honor, reputation, business, professional life, your ambitions, your goals. It has to do with your bosses and other authority figures, which include your mother. Has anyone heard of Jerry Garcia?
Isn't he an ice cream flavor?
Yes, exactly. And he has been dead how long? But not very long.
Yeah, a long time, isn't it?
1995. So 17 years ago? Yeah, none of you knew Wes Craven. Shame on you. But you all know Jerry Garcia because, of course, you eat ice cream. But this is, the 10th house is the house of reputation. This man is dead. Everyone knows his name.
And he has a cult following.
And he has a cult following. And he has ice cream named after him, no less. I mean, so that's how the 10th house works. People talk about you. The planets are at the top of the chart. We have Pluto, Mercury. How did I end up with all these Leos tonight? But I think we've done 4 Leos.
Yeah.
All of this, I guess because they're all, you know, in their own way, really creative, outstanding persons. But look at that. That is powerful. All right, Martha, we're putting you down. Bring it up, Jerry. Strongest aspect, Sun conjunct Mercury. Communication. He wrote songs that people know the words to, still. You don't, but...
I don't know. Trucking like a doo-dah man.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll bet you have a tie-dye t-shirt somewhere, too. So, what can we say? American musician, best known for his lead guitar work, singing, and songwriting with the Grateful Dead. cult figure with popularity approaching worship by many deadheads. Died of a heart attack on August 9th, 1995.
Just after his birthday.
Just after his birthday.
Look at that Venus conjunct Jupiter up there.
Isn't that lovely?
Wow.
But because it's in a cadent house, it's not as powerful as this Sun-Mercury conjunction. But it's a nice aspect.
He must have been a really easygoing guy.
I would imagine that there was no doubt something
Or his philosophy was real.
about his philosophy that would probably
I
be
don't
very,
know, he was
you know,
easygoing.
peace and love and
Yeah.
all good things.
Right.
Any input on Jerry Garcia? Anything others know about him that I don't?
I don't know much about him.
But you, at least, there were
I
words to
went
the
see him
song
at
that
the Fillmore. And we were
Wow.
all on acid.
1969 or 70?
Yeah, around then.
The Fillmore. Okay. What should he have been doing? I mean, this is a really nice chart. Too bad he died so young.
He should have been leading a cult.
Yeah, with that 10th house, he should have been leading a cult. And clearly, with the Pluto-Mercury Sun conjunct, he was leading a cult and he probably didn't even know he was leading a cult. But that is the chart of a cult figure. Pluto-Mercury Sun conjunction, 10th house. All right, 11th house. Friends, good. Anyone watch Frankenstein?
Oh.
That is the line from Frankenstein. Oh no, it was the wife of Frankenstein, bride of Frankenstein.
Right.
Friends, good.
Friends, acquaintances, associates.
Yep, groups, clubs, organizations, hopes and wishes, social objectives, and your humanitarian goals. Meryl Streep.
All right.
We think of her primarily as an actress and forget that she supports the Academy of American Poets. Aid to Darfur's work with refugees. American Forest, Amnesty International, Clothes Off Our Back Foundation, the Arts Education Partnership, the Center for Health and the Global Environment. And these are just a few.
She's just a wonderful person.
Yeah, that's what we would
Actress.
say.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant actress. Do you think everybody knows her name? More than likely. She has the moon in the 10th house,
Yeah.
which is a household name. But the 11th house, probably the real gist of her work is to be able to take her fame and translate that into doing humanitarian work. Having high hopes, wishes, and the other thing that she probably has a heck of a lot of friends and supporters and well-wishers who are there to help her in all of this. So she probably has a phone tree that she has to dial just to get people to come to assistance on any of these projects.
She also has an intercepted Gemini in the 11th house.
She sure does.
You're good, Joanna. That's interesting.
So what do you think that intercept, the fact that it's intercepted, does that just mute it somewhat?
Well, intercepted signs are considered to be latent, which means that later in life they show up. So chances are, if we were to look at her history, an accurate timeline of her life, chances are she didn't start off being Ms. Philanthropy,
No.
but that there was at some point in her career, perhaps middle-aged, you know, maybe when she hit 40, that all of this fell into place. Because it's a latent quality that's looking for an outlet and requires the right timing.
What I find interesting about her is that she becomes the person she portrays in every role.
Right. You don't see, oh, that's Meryl Streep in a film.
No.
You see this character and you go,
Right.
that's Meryl Streep.
Yeah.
Right, that's like that most recent movie,
Julia and Julia.
well, that one too, but no, the one with Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, is it
Hope Springs,
Rise-
Hope Springs or
That's
something
it,
like
Hope
that.
Springs. I hear
It's-
Tommy Lee Jones is awesome in that as well.
Well, yeah, they're both good, but you look at her and you go, that's not Meryl. I mean, it sort of looks like Meryl Streep, but God, Meryl Streep doesn't look like that.
She changes radically, and her accent, she has the ability to imitate so many
Yeah.
different accents.
Yes.
I think it was Angels in America. She played both
Oh,
an
yeah.
angel and,
A demon?
yeah,
Or-
yeah.
Huh.
And was it Emma Goldberg? Or,
Yeah.
it's just amazing.
Yeah.
So, dominant 11th house, 29.7% of her power.
And it's
And it's harmonious. And it is her greatest harmony. So, if we were going to tell her what to do, we might look at this chart and not advise acting. It's hard to know really
I don't see acting in
How?
that chart at all.
that came about.
Be a teacher.
Unless it's the moon up in the 10th house. Where do you, I mean, where is the acting?
Leo rising, Pluto in Leo in the first house,
Okay.
which is transforming
Yeah.
yourself into the other character. Didn't Ginger Rogers have that?
Ruler of her fifth is Pluto, it's in her first, so she could.
Okay, and then the Neptune in the 3rd house is
Yes,
sextile
the
to Pluto.
Neptune, yeah.
And Neptune is in a powerful opposition with her midheaven,
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
or so I think.
So she could
No.
well, it's not powerful.
It's not.
It's
Oh,
about
I'm
6
looking at the
degrees
wrong
apart.
chart. It would help
Oh,
if
yeah.
I...
Yeah, look at the right
Yeah, if I
chart.
look at...
It's still enough.
I think it's still in opposition.
Yeah, I mean, she can.
It's got to be at least an 8-degree orb, and that's a 6
The
degree.
square would
Yes,
be
it is.
the
It is.
12th house.
in opposition.
Yeah. She create illusion.
Mm-hmm. What she does, too.
Well, and
She's doing a very bad
the most powerful aspect in this chart is the Sun conjunct Uranus, which is those constantly changing characters.
Right. Which is ruled by Cancer, which is large institutions. So that's where a lot of her foundation work probably comes into.
Cancer is large institutions.
No,
Well,
12th house.
Oh,
You were saying that because it rules the 12th
Venus
house?
is in
Right.
the 12th.
One last chart, so we can bring this to a close. The 12th house. All right. Secrets, mysteries, detective work, sorrows, disappointments. I'm feeling sad. What else? Places of confinement, hidden enemies, prisons, jails, asylums, monasteries, ashrams, zoos, hospitals, social work, welfare, the occult, unseen psychic forces. Ooh.
So who do we have?
And then large institutions.
Jimmy Hoffa. Ooh, you talk
Banks.
about ooh.
Banks.
Right. Whatever happened to, no, second house or banks? Institutions such as
Schools.
hospitals,
Schools.
yeah, you might, schools could, especially if they're
Well,
boarding
A
schools.
boarding school maybe, or, you know,
But more institutions such as
Hospitals.
mental institutions.
places of confinement.
Right. So, whatever happened to Jimmy Hoffa?
He disappeared.
No, actually we don't know.
He just disappeared.
This is the great mystery.
Well,
I mean, we could say he got murdered, but has the body ever been found?
No. He got murdered
Has there
really
been
well.
anyone who has confessed to killing him?
No.
So, did he get murdered?
It's a likely possibility, but we don't know.
We don't know for sure. Therein lies the great mystery, and that's what the 12th house rules. Now, was he a kind of an underworld
No.
character? He was the American Labor Union leader who disappeared July 30th, 1975. He was declared dead 7 years later on July 30th, 1982. I'm sure somebody needed to collect their insurance policy and be able to put their children through school.
Was he the one who did a lot of philanthropic things but got busted for tax evasion?
No,
That
he was a
sounded like
labor
Al
union.
Capone.
No, he was a
Al
labor. He was
Okay.
a labor
Yeah,
union.
He wasn't considered to be that reputable of a person. Convicted of jury tampering, bribery, fraud, and he was imprisoned. 12th house. Imprisoned, disappeared. 12th house. So, this is sadly in the wrong order, but we can see here
But it's the most powerful.
that the 12th house is the most powerful, 22.6.
It's really just, well, he's got a lot of discord, doesn't he?
What happens when you have a discordant first house? So hard to imagine with Venus in the first house. I mean, clearly there was something charismatic about him that would allow him to rise into these positions unless he was actually blackmailing everyone, and that's how he got ahead.
Well, we have Jupiter ruling his 10th house.
Jupiter ruling the 10th house.
Would he-
What is the dominant planet in this chart? It's the ascendant. And then it's a tie between Saturn, the moon, Mercury, and the sun. All have 10% of his power.
And all discord doesn't.
Yeah, and if we look at the total, it's strongly discordant. So born in 1913, disappeared in 75. That was what, age 62? So, but look at that first house. Oops. A highly discordant Aquarius ascendant and first house would say this one was just a little authority oppositional. May have had a slightly abrasive character or personality or mode of self-expression, and just made some enemies. What happened to him? We really don't know. We can only speculate. So,
Oh, and he has Pisces intercepted in his first house, which would make even more of a mystery of what happened to him.
yeah. Yep, Pisces is intercepted. There's a powerful conjunction of the Sun, Mercury, and the Ascendant. And he was a charismatic speaker, whether you liked him or not. He was somebody that could get people's attention. So, what would we tell him to do? Let's look for the harmony in his chart. Fourth
it's in
house.
the 4th house, yeah.
So,
Did he
Real
have a-
estate.
and it's Pluto in the 4th house. Is Pluto the best planet?
I think
Look
so.
at that. What does Pluto rule? Groups, organizations, unions.
Unions, so welfare.
Yeah. So, in a sense,
He was doing
he was doing what he should be doing. Maybe perhaps he should have focused on building you know, an old folks' home for Teamsters with Pluto in the fourth house, you know, he may not have been poured into the foundation if that happened.
Right. He was out strong-arming everybody.
Right, and that was this facet of his personality. This, whether you're using overt or covert means, you're going to get what you want.
Well, you know, it's interesting that Pluto's trying those three.
Yeah.
That stellium, whatever you
And
call
he,
it.
you know, he did well for a long time. Who knows? Maybe.
He did bring unions to power. I mean, it was that time
But
when
he was
became
very, I remember, he was real
But
powerful.
also when they began to really overreach.
And who knows? He could be 99 years old and living in Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
So we don't know.
Oh, and look, that Neptune in the fifth house opposing the Mars and the, I don't know whether it's the Uranus, but, you know, another, yeah.
You know, was he poisoned?
Mystery, yeah.
Was he asphyxiated by a hooker?
We could make up stories.
Poisoned by a child? We could. We could just make up stories. You know, the one spreading around in 1975 was cement galoshes.
Yeah.
So,
Well, the sun is a very powerful union figure.
His son is too?
Yeah.
Yeah. What, what's his name?
To this day, yes.
Yeah.
all right, we're 5 minutes over. I've got to bring this to a close because I have a ride arriving. Next week, dominant signs. October 4th, aspects. And then we're going to look at societies, trinities, elements, and qualities. And then lastly, we're going to look at the harmonies and discords in a chart and how to really work with that, how to alchemize the discords and how to emphasize the harmonies. Thank you all for coming.